The biggest by-election swing against a government in the country's history has plunged the Morrison government into minority. Welcome to Insiders. Australia now has a hung parliament. That's not unprecedented, but it took a swing of historical proportions to bring it about. Take a look at these numbers that transformed one of the Liberal Party's safest seats. At close of counting, the Liberal Party's Dave Sharma had 41.7% of the primary vote, the Independent, Kerryn Phelps, 30.3% and Labor, 11.4%. That translates, after preferences, to a two-party preferred vote, Liberals 48, Kerryn Phelps 52. And that represents a swing against the government of 19.7%, easily the biggest ever. Now the pressure is really on the Prime Minister and the government. Scott Morrison warned the electorate that a vote for Kerryn Phelps could lead to chaos and instability. Now that it's happened, despite his warning, how do they address that situation? And how do they explain it to the rest of the country? Let's hear now from the major players, starting with our program guest this morning, the winning candidate, Kerryn Phelps.
This has been a David and Goliath struggle. We have been up against the major parties with all of their infrastructure and all of their resources, and here we were with a little pop-up campaign with about 3 weeks' notice to put together this awesome campaign. What we have done is tapped into a sentiment in the Australian people to talk about the issues that are important to them, not the issues about survival for a particular political party. And I said that this victory is for the people of Wentworth, and indeed it is. And I will stand for you and stand with you in the Australian Parliament.
This is the first time I've ever run for elected office, as you know, and the first time I've ever run a political campaign. And it's been a little bruising, there's no doubt about it, and it's certainly had some surprises too. It's also been, though, a very humbling and enlightening experience. And I'm sorry I wasn't able to earn the trust of the voters of Wentworth tonight.
What has happened here in Wentworth is not unexpected. Liberals are angry, and they've expressed that. None in this room, though, I know. They've expressed that. And I want to make something really clear. The result today is on us, the Liberals, not on Dave Sharma.
All right, as I said, our program guest this morning is Kerryn Phelps. She'll be joining us shortly, and so will Labor's Leader of Opposition Business, Tony Burke. First, we'll check out the Sunday papers and get some analysis now from our panel, Fran Kelly, Peter Van Onsel and Dennis Atkins. We've never been in this territory before. Scott Morrison just said of the biggest swing in the country's history that it was not unexpected. Now, we really need, I think that demands further explanation from the Prime Minister, but he's not here. In his absence, Peter, why was it not unexpected?
Well, not unexpected, I guess, because they knew that electorate in particular would be deeply unhappy at Malcolm Turnbull being treated the way he was, that they wouldn't agree with a lot of the policy scripts that the right of the party have been talking about. Kerryn Phelps is incredibly popular in that area and is from that area. The Liberal candidate wasn't from the area, as good as he was on paper. He wasn't from the area, and he was a man, and the Prime Minister didn't want a male candidate. Voters, a lot of voters in Wentworth that I spoke to wanted a woman to run. So you bring all of that together and they still only lost it on those numbers, 52 to 48. So they've made a lot of mistakes along the way, and that's before we even get to the week ahead in Parliament, which was a disaster.
Well, let's start with the Malcolm Turnbull factor before we come to you guys. Now, Craig Laundy, who was a minister in the Turnbull government and now a backbencher, was quite blunt last night. Here he is.
What did you learn from this?
That it wasn't a good idea to get rid of Malcolm Turnbull as Prime Minister.
OK, that's great, Laundy. Now, you get the impression that Scott Morrison was already on board with that idea. This is what he said on Thursday.
I know you're angry. I understand you're angry. I was there when it was happening, supporting the then Prime Minister when they were seeking to take him down. And I stood by him. And what I'm telling you is this candidate for Wentworth will be as good as the last one. He'll be as good as the last one. He's the same calibre.
Fran, he seemed to be saying, OK, I know. Don't punish me, though. I was an innocent bystander.
Yeah, it wasn't me. It wasn't me. I mean, Karen Phelps's, small pop-up campaign had cyclonic force winds behind it that were blowing out of that Liberal Party room from the dumping of Malcolm Turnbull. That's what turbocharged this. Peter's right, referring to the gender thing, because that was such a massive issue in the wake of that leadership challenge that there really was fury, I think, amongst Liberal voters, certainly the Liberal women in that party room and Liberal voters, many of them. And so Karen Phelps was the right gender. She was a local. The cyclonic winds continued for the coalition because right through the campaign, issue after issue came up on a national scale that really hit every hot button, if you like, and Karen Phelps didn't miss them. But no doubt this win is fuelled by them dumping Malcolm Turnbull and not to this day really being able to explain why.
And yet, Dennis, not the MPs at this point from the right, but the commentators from the right are certainly saying, no, far from Malcolm Turnbull being the issue, it was his fault.
Yes, apparently. So you had a Prime Minister who was, slightly behind in the polls, but well ahead of his Labor counterpart, and he got tossed out by his party. He then did what he said he was always going to do, which was leave the Parliament. He left Australia, went to New York and didn't take part in the campaign, which when you think about it is, it's understandable. I mean,
no, but there's the criticism. They wanted him to come in on his white horse and save the day, and he didn't do it.
But a month before that, they disliked him so much they dumped him as Prime Minister.
Imagine if he had ridden in on the white horse and had dared to say something about the week of madness. In fact, my understanding is that they tried to get him to write a letter, but they wouldn't let him. He said, well, I'd have to address the issue that brought us to this, and that was not negotiable. So that didn't happen.
Yeah. Barry, there was nothing Malcolm Turnbull could do that would satisfy the right. He didn't campaign, so they said, yes, we dumped you as leader because we thought you were a bad campaigner, but you should have campaigned in Wentworth. Had he campaigned in Wentworth, they would have said, you're a distraction, you're off message, this is why we dumped you in the first place. As far as the hard right of the Liberal Party are concerned, Malcolm Turnbull could walk on water across Sydney Harbour and they just accuse him of not paying the toll. There's nothing he can do.
Sam Maiden last night tweeted a text message from a Liberal MP and it said, Malcolm Turnbull got the vote to 68%, you got rid of him, it's now 38%. What part of that don't they understand?
And yet, what we're already seeing is calls from that part of the party for the party to harden up on the right. I mean, this result, despite all their errors along the way, would have been that much worse had Peter Dutton actually won the challenge.
I do think Karen Phelps was a particularly strong independent in that seat at this time. Like we said, the gender, she's not just a local, she's a strong, well-known local.
There were other independents in the field who couldn't possibly have won, even in her absence.
Exactly right. So it took that force of that national profile that she had, I think.
I wonder, though, because it was 19.7, they needed 17.7, that crucial 2% that got them over the top, was that impacted, do you think, Dennis, by the events of the past 2 weeks?
Oh, I think the events of the past 2 weeks had to have some impact because they day by day confirmed perceptions about the government in terms of competence, in terms of political judgment, and just in terms of running a shambolic show. And so I think voters who might have been thinking, oh, look, I want to punish them, but I may not. I may just pull back. This gave them permission to do that final act and put their votes in the ballot box to vote vote against their lifelong history. These were a lot of voters who have voted Liberal all their life. And they went in yesterday on Saturday, and for the first time they voted for an independent.
And I think you left expediency off that list. I think that the final week and the judgment about moving the embassy, you might be able to mount that case, but do not mount it 4 days before the by-election in that
Not
seat.
when there was so much good news to talk about.
And don't
it all
expect
got
it to be seen
obliterated.
as completely expedient, which feeds into the narrative of you're only interested in your own jobs.
And employment at 5%.
Not running the country
new
to the
tax
best.
cuts for small business all got washed away with the controversy over the embassy.
And they're so short-term in their thinking because their campaign, I mean, even John Howard was running these lines, but so was Scott Morrison, they all were. Don't vote for Kerryn Phelps because that will equate to instability. Well, given that they knew that they were likely to lose the seat, how do they now spin their way out of their own self-described instability that comes from
Well,
here?
given the instability, what are the prospects now of an early election?
Well, they'll fight that, so they will hope not to have one. I don't...
Well, Labor was in like Flynn with that line.
Kerryn Phelps will hold, though, to what she said about supporting the government on confidence motions. It wouldn't be in her interest anyway to go straight to an election with all the money that would be required. Same for Rebecca Sharkey. I don't think that's going to change.
There was left the options open. We'll explore that. In fact, we might as well explore that now. Next up, Kerryn Phelps. And while she joins us, here is some more reaction from the Prime Minister to last night's extraordinary result.
Tonight is a night where we listen, where we learn, where we accept the blows, where we congratulate those who have been successful, likely tonight. Still a lot of votes to count, obviously. But that said, in Kerryn Phelps taking on that role, we will work constructively with all of those who sit on the crossbench, as we always have. The Liberal National Government will be back at work on Monday. And so while tonight is not an unexpected outcome for us, they have looked at Canberra, and the Liberal Party has paid a big price tonight for the events of several months ago. But as a party, we will continue to rise again. And the reason we will rise again is because we have the men and women, and a man here in Dave Sharman.
Kerryn Phelps, good morning. Congratulations.
Thank you, Barry.
And thank you for joining us after such a big night. Not only did you win, but you're now part of Australian history. Did you see that part of it coming?
Well, I knew that if I was able to win the election, and we always thought it was a long shot, that it would have to make history, because it would have to, be the first time that anyone other than the Liberal Party had owned their seat since 1944, and certainly it hasn't been won by a non-Liberal candidate since 1901. So it was going to be a major victory if it did happen.
And you talked about it as being a pop-up campaign. It was quite late in the piece that you decided to run. Were you genuinely torn?
Oh, absolutely, because it was the farthest thing from my mind until Malcolm Turnbull was dumped. And then everywhere I went in the streets in the eastern suburbs, somebody would be coming up to me and saying, would you please have a run at Wentworth? And, Jackie and I had to sit down, and as a family, we had to talk about what that would mean, what the implications would be to our lives, and to, to the fact that I'd have to be spending so much time in Canberra. Of course, I've done that before through the AMA some years ago, but it wasn't something that I had in my forward plans at all. And so the other thing that we had to consider was whether we could mount a complete campaign infrastructure within a 3-week period. And so I wasn't prepared to actually make the decision and announce that I would do it until we knew that we could do it properly.
How did you do that? How did you finance it?
Well, Jackie and I were prepared to underwrite it, and then being a grassroots campaign, we asked for crowdfunding, and people started donating small and larger amounts of money to help us out, because they shared the vision. They wanted to see the Liberals sent a message, and they wanted to see me as their representative for Wentworth in Canberra. Now,
17.7% must have felt like Mount Everest at times during the campaign. Were there moments of despondency?
Oh, look, of course. I mean, things went up and down for the first couple of weeks, and it went from this is impossible to, oh well, just maybe we'll scrape over, to it'll be close. And then as the last week went by, it became more and more evident that a momentum was building. And even yesterday, I wasn't entirely sure that the momentum would be enough to get us over the line to such a to such a win. As the day further progressed and I was getting reports in from our booth captains and they were saying, you know, there's a really strongly positive mood out there, people want to see change, and we thought that maybe it would be possible, but it really wasn't until we saw the numbers on the screen last night that I could confidently say that we had it won. Well,
you say the sacking of Malcolm Turnbull is what got you into the thing in the first place, but in that last week or two, with the Malcolm Turnbull issue to one side, what was it, do you think, that changed that mood?
Well, there was a sequence of events that happened that, you know, people just became utterly exasperated with the Liberal Party. First of all, they seemed to be only interested in their own self-interest. They only seemed to want to talk about their leadership challenges and their factional battles. And, you know, it's like, hang on a second, and we're out here, we're the Australian people, we want you to focus on our issues. The Religious Freedoms Report was something that was quite early on an issue. I called for that to be released. The government had been sitting on that for 5 months and doing nothing about it and refusing to release it. And then when there was a leak and a suggestion that gay kids would be thrown out of school if someone found out they were gay, that caused an outrage.
But then they reversed that pretty quickly.
Oh, well, of course they had to, because, you know, they got found out. You know, they were trying to sit on that. There were then a whole lot of other issues. I mean, the Pauline Hanson motion in the Senate, where senators from the Liberal Party voted on that "it's okay to be white" motion. You know, people said, what's going on there? And then the next day, their best excuse was, oops, we didn't mean to. We didn't actually read the motion. Now, that's shambolic government. You know, that is poor governance. And so people were saying, well, you know, how can you possibly explain that? How can you call yourself a responsible government and do that sort of thing? You know, and then,
well, accepting then that it was shambolic, how does it now help that we have a hung parliament?
Well, what helps is that you have responsible crossbenchers who are prepared to discuss issues on their merits, to actually bring it back to the issues that the people of Australia want the government to be focusing on. And I believe that having now a hung parliament, then the crossbenchers then become a very important element in the decision-making process. And it's not just a decision about what legislation gets voted on in which way, but it's really about the agenda that is set and the responses that the government needs to make to what the people are saying through their representatives on the crossbench.
So how do you feel now about the prospect of a no-confidence vote in the government? How would you respond to that?
I haven't changed my view to that. I mean, we saw that kind of recklessness last week with people voting on motions that they hadn't read and didn't understand. And that's not how I operate. I need to have evidence. I need to see a full brief. I need to know what I'm voting on. And to talk about voting one way or another on a hypothetical motion in the future would be similarly careless.
Then can I take it from that you're comfortable that this government should go full term and the election be in May next year?
I've certainly said that I think that the government and all governments should go full term unless there are exceptional circumstances. And, you know, the next election is due in May next year, and that's time enough.
And just on one issue, on the prospect of legislation to deal with the asylum seekers issue, if the government was to try and legislate so that the refugees would go to New Zealand, but then they would close the back door, they would prevent those refugees from ever going to Australia. Do you think that's a pragmatic approach, that that's the way to go?
First order of business is to get the kids off Nauru with their families to Australia for urgent medical and psychological help. And I join the AMA's call and my thousands of colleagues who have been calling for this, and I believe that should be a first order of business. The resettlement options should be explored, and New Zealand is an extremely good option, and it's definitely something that I'd like to look at the foreign policy and other implications of that decision. But certainly it's a very attractive decision. There are refugee advocates who've spoken to me about that being at least a very good interim position, and so it's definitely on the table.
Well, Karen Phelps, congratulations once again, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Barry.
And now we're joined again from Sydney by Labor's Manager of Opposition Business, Tony Burke. Good morning.
Good morning, Barry.
OK, history was made last night, but what are you saying was the biggest single cause?
Oh, last night the people of Wentworth made a very clear statement that they've had enough of the instability. They've had enough of the division. We still haven't had an answer to the question as to why Malcolm Turnbull isn't Prime Minister of Australia. And People have absolutely had enough of that. You know, they've watched now, as we've had 3 Prime Ministers, 3 Treasurers, 3 Senate leaders. It looks like we'll get 4 Deputy Prime Ministers, the way the National Party's going. And people have realised that whether it's an Abbott government, a Morrison government, a Turnbull government, Tony Abbott's always been in charge. The hard right agenda has made this government incapable of dealing with issues like climate change, and people have had enough of it.
Now, though, that the people of Wentworth have got it out of their system, you can't expect that kind of response from around the country at a general election. Every seat is very different.
Oh, every seat is different. I don't think we'd be expecting every seat to deliver the biggest swing in history. But that's what we saw last night. And as a result of seeing that, Australia now has a minority government in a hung parliament. Exactly what at the last election the Liberal Party was claiming was a threat if you vote Labor. All the things that they said at the last election, we're now dealing with the exact opposite.
Julia Gillard governed with 72. They've got 75. It can be done.
Oh, it can be. The problem for them is when they had 76, they still couldn't deliver stable government. They haven't been able to keep control of the parliament, even with a majority, because their own members have been so obsessed with their internal issues that you get so many occasions where they don't all turn up to vote, they don't pay attention to what they're voting for. The chaos isn't simply a feature of their numbers, it's a feature of their arrogance and a feature of how out of touch they are.
Just a bit of history. When Bob Hawke left the parliament in 1992, his seat was lost to an independent, Phil Cleary. He got a higher primary vote than Kerryn Phelps got last night. 12 months after that, Labor went on and won an election. It's a sobering thought, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think you can pull out any precedent that involves the biggest swing in history. That's the nature of what we saw yesterday. And the real test about what yesterday was about, we have to look at it from the perspective of Scott Morrison. Scott Morrison told us that yesterday, if an independent won, that would mean not just instability in the parliament, but he said economic instability. Now, if that's his position, yeah, that means he's actually spent this whole campaign arguing that if we got the result we got last night, it would cause instability in people's lives and in the economy. Now, I don't see how he can argue that and not then say that we have to have an election. Either Scott Morrison was lying the whole way through the election campaign and he's now going to simply cling to power because he's the advertising guy and he really just uses whatever argument he wants each day, or we have an election. I don't see there's any middle ground there, given the arguments that both he and his Treasurer put about instability in the economy.
So what are you prepared to do about that? Will you now consider bringing on a vote of no confidence?
Oh, to get to a vote of no confidence, you need 76 votes, and we want to see a shortened Labor government be elected at a general election. That's what we want to see. In terms of what the numbers be, there'll be a whole lot of analysis back and forth, but think about it in these terms. The last time, and we have had this term a situation where the numbers were exactly like this because both the Wentworth and Bennelong by-elections were on at the same time. At that point, they cancelled a week of Parliament, and while Parliament wasn't sitting, gave in to what Labor and the crossbench had been calling for, and that was the week that they called the Banking Royal Commission. This government has had many periods during this term where they have shown that they're incapable of governing even with a majority. Now we have a hung parliament.
Labor's vote was 11.4%, down about 6%. That's embarrassingly low, isn't it?
Scott Morrison and others and all the commentary was making clear, and obviously congratulations to Tim Murray for the campaign that he ran, and I should have said at the start, congratulations to Kerryn Phelps on a victory. But all the commentary was making clear, particularly during the final week, that whether or not the Liberals won this seat was going to be determined by who came third. And people heard that. It's the most strategic voting that I've seen. A whole lot of people not taking anyone's how to vote. The people of Wentworth knew exactly what they were doing, and a large number of Labor voters did decide the best way to make sure the Liberals didn't win was to vote directly for Kerryn Phelps, and that's reflected in the vote yesterday.
All right, to put it another way, you ran dead, you cynically drove down the Labor vote because you judged you couldn't win and you wanted Kerryn Phelps to win.
I've described exactly what a whole lot of Labor voters did. You can see that exactly there. The person telling people exactly how this would turn out was Scott Morrison. You go to his own media conferences, he was making clear to people that if Labor came third in that particular by-election, that was the most likely scenario that would get rid of the Liberals. People heard that and said the prime thing they wanted to do was to get rid of the Liberals and send a message to the Liberal Party. And if you watched Scott Morrison's speech last night, where he was bizarrely comparing people handing out Liberal Party how-to votes to the athletes at the Invictus Games, he has not heard a message. He's the same angry advertising guy who he was a week ago.
Just one final question, the issue that I raised with Kerryn Phelps on the whether you would support the government's legislation, and that is if these refugees go to New Zealand, you would see to it, along with the government, that they would never be able to travel to Australia?
The most important thing here is that we, same as Kerryn Phelps said, that we listen to the medical advice with respect to children. And if children need treatment and assessment, we shouldn't have a situation where the doctors are saying one thing and then the minister's blocking it. Bill Shorten and Shane Newman released an announcement about a private members bill during the week, which is our attempt to try to do something about that. What I don't want to see, Barry, and I'm sorry to give a longer answer, but it's important, what I don't want to see is everybody in their corners, the way we saw when the Malaysia agreement was on the table, and Scott Morrison blocked that from opposition. Now, half the people who drowned after Scott Morrison had blocked the Malaysia agreement. There are children in a genuine situation of crisis. The medical experts all tell us that. We've put forward a way of dealing with that. Scott Morrison said something during the week. We're yet to find out whether that was just something that he was saying in advance of the Wentworth by-election or whether it's something he actually believes.
Thanks for your time this morning.
Good to be back.
Now I've been happy lately, thinking about the things to come, and I believe it could be.
Scott Morrison's first venture into foreign policy was a showstopper.
On the question of the recognition of Jerusalem as the capital, I do find those arguments persuasive.
He is open to shifting the Australian embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, just a few days out from the Wentworth by-election, which has a large cohort of Jewish voters.
We are committed to a two-state solution, but frankly, it hasn't been going that well.
This is pure political campaigning.
Today we see just how desperate Scott Morrison is.
It's principled, it's right for Australia, we stand by Israel.
So is this decision motivated by Wentworth or keeping the Conservatives in your party happy, or both?
It's not motivated by either.
It smacks of panic.
It's a conversation worth having.
What has Australian politics come to?
If peace train, holy roller, everyone jump upon the peace train.
Moving an embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem is deeply provocative.
The reality is Jerusalem is contested territory.
As Donald Trump proved when he announced the United States would do it.
Did you talk to the Jewish community?
They're obviously very supportive of it.
All of them?
Well, it's a large community.
This has the potential to destabilise the region.
Arab ambassadors united in alarm.
I think it does make sense.
Now, when people say sensible things, I think it's important to listen to them.
It is unhelpful to the peace process.
Not a lot of progress has been made.
Come on, the peace train.
The Prime Minister's surprise suggestion that Australia could move its Israeli embassy to Jerusalem may have backfired.
We have reports that Indonesia is considering suspending its imminent trade deal.
We have to explain.
Explosive messages sent by Indonesia's Foreign Minister to Maurice Payne show the country's fury.
It will slap Indonesia's face on the Palestine issue.
It is a relationship of trust.
This will affect bilateral relations.
We have a very good relationship with Indonesia.
No one on this side of the House believes that Israel is a rogue state.
The question goes to whether the President of Indonesia was advised by text message.
That was one part of the question, but there are a number of other parts, and when you look at them all, it had the diversity of a food court, I have to say.
A secret and classified security document has been leaked, warning there are risks of violence if the Prime Minister goes ahead with his shake-up of foreign policy in the Middle East.
There is no evidence of planned violence in response to the government's announcement.
It's been a very untidy week for the Prime Minister.
And you deal with it and you keep focused on the things that really matter. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Cheers.
And it didn't have to be an untidy week. I just remind you again, unemployment hit 5%. They got a company tax cut through the parliament. They got a trade agreement through the parliament. They sorted out the GST. But this is why the Prime Minister said that he needed to raise the embassy issue.
Dave Sharma's proposal says, no, this can actually help us get to a two-state solution. This can actually help us achieve a goal that the world has been unable to achieve up until now.
Now, Fran, you can take whatever view you like on where the embassy ought to be, but how would this help?
How would
moving the embassy help
the peace
bring
process?
about a peace solution in the Middle
By
East?
all accounts and all players that I've heard of, apart from Donald Trump, obviously, and Benjamin Netanyahu, it wouldn't help. It would get in the way of it. I think one of the quotes was it puts Australia's hand, along with America's, very firmly on the shoulder of Israel, and any negotiations. A lot of what's the two-state solution got to do with the embassy? This should be the last thing. And as Gareth Evans pointed out, these are tough negotiations. In any negotiation, you get something back for something. So this is bad negotiating anyway. But the broader foreign policy picture is, all accounts, it doesn't help. And we even had a leak, I think it was The Guardian that leaked the ASIO advice to the government that not only would it help, it potentially could lead to unrest here and overseas. So that
leak in itself was extraordinary.
There is no rationale. I mean, Dave Sharma has been arguing this for some months. He's written op-eds about this. He firmly holds this position.
Not always.
Well, in the last few months he has. And so it's not a new position for him. And that's OK. Let him argue it if he got elected to the parliament. But why raise it? Prime Minister imprimatur in the final days with no... I mean, has anyone heard a peep from Scott Morrison about Middle East policy, really, in the weeks he's been Prime Minister?
He gave an interview to the Jewish News 3 weeks ago where he said that policy on the Middle East and Israel under him would not change.
It was settled, exactly. Yeah. It was settled. It looked, not only did he raise it out of the blue, not only was it a very big stake to play, but he linked it directly to Dave Sharma. And so, you know, they just had no clothes on this explanation. The timing was forced upon them.
That's exactly right. The link to Dave Sharma in that quote from the Prime Minister makes you understandably cynical about the timing and the motivation for it. But that's not even good marketing. I mean, this is meant to be the PM with a marketing background, a strategic background as a former state director of the New South Wales Liberal Party. But it's Shabbos for the Jewish community this weekend. Most Jewish religious voters who might hold a view that Jerusalem should be the capital would have already pre-polled. They'd already voted by the time this Prime Minister made this announcement. Those who hadn't voted weren't as religious and were perhaps less inclined as a voting cohort to support the idea of moving the embassy, seeing all the other myriad of problems. So even from a marketing perspective, the marketing PM got it wrong with the timing if it was cynical.
This is what the Shadow Foreign Minister, Penny Wong, had to say in the Senate.
This is really out of step with so many nations' view about what is the appropriate way to try and support a two-state solution. Different nations have different perspectives about that, but I think the problem is making an announcement like this in the way that he has really signals to the community and to the international community that he's prepared, Mr Morrison's prepared to play domestic politics with foreign policy.
And then, of course, what happened is that there was another leak, and that's the WhatsApp message exchange between Indonesia's foreign minister and Maurice Payne. And they made it perfectly clear they were unhappy with the situation. I would have thought farmers in Australia, Dennis, wouldn't be too impressed either. You know, in the last 20 years, we've sent 6 million live cattle to Indonesia. You wouldn't want to disturb that trade, as Labor once did and paid a price for it.
Absolutely. And as Barnaby Joyce pointed out helpfully during the week, you know, sort of, I think he had other things on his mind probably, but he made a very good point that you know, trade with Indonesia is vital, and you do not upset the biggest in terms of population, Muslim nation on the earth. John Howard knew that. It was always telling, and I remember that John Howard, after he met with George Bush and Tony Blair and gave the tick to Australia's involvement in Iraq, he flew straight to Jakarta to talk to Megawati, who was then the president, to say, look, can you calm things down? I know this decision will upset a lot of your people.
You mean he didn't do it by text message?
No, he didn't. No. So yes, I think that and you said that the leak of the ASIO stuff was extraordinary, but the leak of the WhatsApp stuff was
extraordinary.
Yeah.
I mean, who had that to leak? And
well, under that kind of pressure, Scott Morrison decided in the Parliament that the best form of defence is attack, so he had to go specifically at New South Wales Labor.
I know the member for Sydney thinks Israel is a rogue state, Mr Speaker. That's what I know. I know the New South Wales Labor Party, with their good mates up there, Shaket Mosalmani, who banned the New South Wales Jewish Board of Deputies from attending, Mr Speaker, the Labor Union Multicultural Action Committee. So we have a New South Wales Labor Party which is behaving in an anti-Semitic way, Mr Speaker, and they want to pretend to the Australian people that they're supporters of Israel? Really?
An accusation of anti-Semitism is extraordinary, and there is a reason why the reaction you just saw from the opposition occurred. I ask that the Prime Minister withdraw.
He didn't.
He didn't, no.
Now, I'll just clear up one thing before we go on to other issues. The Prime Minister's office is a bit disturbed that we're all overlooking wills. I mentioned wills in the interview with Tony Burke. The swing in wills was about 23%, but Phil Cleary was found to be ineligible under the Constitution because he was a school teacher, and so that result was struck from the record. Now,
so when it comes to official, this is
It'd
historic.
be handy that it wasn't. Handy for the Liberal Party right now, because as bad as it was, you don't want it to be the worst. But that result was struck from the record, and then he came back in 1993.
Yeah, and I still think arguing over 20% is maybe not a lot of mileage in that.
I mean,
don't waste your time.
You can argue it in the front bar, but you can't put it up on the notice board in the club room.
It's the same reason we all get to say that Malcolm Roberts was never a senator.
Yeah, which is true.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right. Now, Nauru and Manus, and I asked the question both of Kieran Phelps and of Tony Burke. I got the impression from Tony Burke when he gave that example when the coalition was in opposition that they disturbed the Malaysian thing, that's something they would be reluctant to do. It was almost like he's softening up the electorate now to say, look, we might support the government on this and close the back door.
There's a lot of talk going on within Labor about them needing to move their position a bit to get some action. And then, of course, Gillian Triggs and other refugee advocates, David Mann and others, have said, listen, maybe some pragmatism is required here to save these poor people who have been on that island for 5 years. So Labor has this private members bill which says if we're in government, we will listen to the medical experts, we'll set up an independent panel, not one dominated by Nauruan officials, and the Minister will take the advice and we will act on that advice. That would get the women and some of the children off, because it's the children who are suffering so horrendously at the moment, the doctors keep pointing out. So Labor has gone that far. Then the Prime Minister threw the New Zealand option back on the table. Labor's not inclined to support this option that shuts down forever anybody left on Nauru and Manus Island ever being able to come from any country ever in their whole lifetime, no matter if they won the Nobel Prize, to visit Australia. But there is some pressure within Labor over that point, and people are pushing for some pragmatism. Now, I think for Scott Morrison to prove that this is more than just a last-minute thought bubble to try and get a few votes, he needs to take constructive and very active dialogue with the crossbench and the Senate crossbench, because I spoke to a few senators and they haven't, seen no real effort or follow-up from the government yet much on this.
Will be now.
Yeah, I mean, look, I find as a policy script this idea of, you can never come to Australia, that closes the back door as a policy of itself, not good policy, but using sick children as reverse bait, as a disincentive for boat people to come to Australia, leaving them on Nauru is just so unpalatable that I think, like it or not, the least bad option, if you have to get that law passed to be able to open up the New Zealand solution to get women, to get sick children, I should say, out of Nauru, then I think they come together and you just lump it.
Ultimate pragmatism, but it may be necessary.
It may be necessary. Also, I think there is still a bit of pressure within the Labor Party to find a way to shift their policy a bit before their December conference in Adelaide. I don't think we should discount that as a factor in Labor.
Yeah, that's a good point. But also, we need to. I think the sums don't add up. New Zealand offers 150. I think there's still close to 1,200 or 1,500 people on Nauru and Manus Island. They've been there for 5 years. I think what's changed in the community, and the doctors have really led this, I think, in the past few months, is people going, you can't just leave people there forever. Like, what are you going to do? And there's been no answer to that.
I had a list of you could broadly put it under the heading disasters of the week, I suppose, and we're going to have to go through these fairly quickly, I'm afraid. We haven't got a lot of time. But the OK to be white vote and the fact that so many senators, coalition senators, supported it, including 6 ministers. Dennis, I know you've expressed very strong views on this topic, but let's hear first from Matthias Cormann. It was an administrative error.
As a result of an administrative process failure, the government senators in the chamber ended up on advice voting in support of the motion. As leader of the government in the Senate, I take responsibility for that error, and I'm sorry that that happened. It is indeed regrettable.
Dennis?
Well, yes. I mean, a bloke came up to me after I wrote my piece where I did express strong views, and he said, look, either they knew what they were doing, which is appalling, or they didn't know what they were doing, which is worse. And I think they're the sort of, the two choices you had. And, the fact that this motion had been around, the government had signalled back in September that they were going to oppose it. And then all of a sudden it came up and apparently, and I still find this hard to believe, that some staffers in the Attorney General's office then sent the signal to the senators saying vote for it.
But even if they did, I mean, Simon Birmingham on my show said, yes, it was a mistake, you know how it is, you rush in, you vote. Well, OK, so they can take heart that they're also united behind their instructions. But, Darren Hinch there wasn't much debate, but Darren Hinch got to stand up and rail against it and say this should be written on toilet paper, and people, I'm told...
Richard Di Natale spelled it out.
The Greens and Labor were shouting across the chamber at them, what are you doing? So even if they did get the wrong instruction, why didn't a few of them wake up and go, uh-oh?
What have we done?
They had weeks. They had weeks. They'd discussed this. Presumably, they'd planned something. So the idea that an administrative error could derail it so badly at the last moment, I take them at their word that that's what it was.
But they don't read motions.
It's not very good.
Yeah.
My listeners, after Birmingham said that, were like, the text line went crazy. What are we paying these people for if they don't think about anything,
Well, then the second issue was the Environment Minister, Melissa Price, who had already been copping a bit of stick from the press gallery because she's pretty much invisible around the environment issue. In her own words, she stumbled across a table with some people at a restaurant in Canberra. Among them was the former president of Kiribati, Nobel Peace Prize nominee, and according to people at the table, 2 of them at least, she said to him, I know why you're here. You're here for the cash. It's always about the cash. This is, though, what she told the Parliament.
I stumbled across this group, went over to introduce myself to Senator Dodson, who I classify as a friend of mine. But I'm very concerned, yes, some friend, I have to say. I 100% disagree with what he has said was the conversation.
Members on my left.
What I did say is that the Pacific is a very good friend and neighbour to Australia. And in fact, that's exactly what I said to President Tong last night.
All right, well then, Fran, you interviewed President Tong. He's quite the diplomat. This is what he had to say.
Is it incorrect? Did she speak to you like that?
I had people who were there much closer to the minister, and I was a little further away from the minister. And what they would say, what they have said is would have been on the basis of what they heard, and so their account is as accurate as my account would have been.
I think what he was saying is those closest to us know what they heard.
Yeah, he's hard of hearing, and he actually is hard of hearing. And I spoke to him and others afterwards who were standing by exactly their version of events. They also made the point it didn't sound like a joke to them, so they got no sense that the minister was making a joke. So it was...
But because it's contested, does it come down to he said, she said, or Pat Dodson says one thing, she says the other? Well, misleading the Parliament doesn't hold up?
it comes down to she said, they all said.
They all said.
That's the problem that she's got. Look, this won't go anywhere, but it's just another stumble, isn't it?
Barnaby Joyce is apparently back and maybe looking to regain his old spot. Let's hear what really kicked all this off when he went on Sky.
So if it comes up, you'd be keen.
Yeah, if it came up, it was offered to me, I'd take it. But I'm not touting for it. I'm not collecting the numbers for it.
Barnaby had his chance as leader. He did the best part of 2 years in the role. The circumstances under which he stood down for the job are well known to everyone. Michael was elected unanimously by the party room. And in that 6 or 7 months since then, he has been in every corner of regional Australia doing what a National Party leader needs to do.
Now, I'm told nobody is really touting for numbers, but Barnaby's put it out there, so the conversations would be going on, surely.
They are going on, and as we've seen far too many times in this parliament, a lot of the agitation is coming from my neck of the woods up in Queensland. The LNP are not happy with Michael McCormack. They always have been in love with Barnaby Joyce. They regard him as the best retail politician in Australia, and they think that what happened in February this year didn't dent that reputation, which is sort of a surprise to me. But
it's the equivalent, Dennis, don't you think, of continuing to advocate for the football player who's done their knee? They were once the great retail politician, but I'm not sure they're coming back from that injury.
You can reconstruct a knee, but I don't think you can. I don't think you can reconstruct Barnaby Joyce after.
Well, it's the price of that. It's even if that would work. I mean, yes, I think they don't need to do the numbers because I think the numbers are pretty clear around that table, and he would have the numbers, so I don't think anyone needs to count. It's the transactional cost, it's the trigger, and it's the women again. And I heard that if they did run Barnaby Joyce again, there might be some very strong female independents people who might put up their hand to run as independent on the basis of that. So that's another transactional cost.
In New England?
No, in some rural and regional seats.
Oh, yeah. And just on that, if I can just say quickly, we've all been sort of readjusting our list of seats which the coalition should now view as being in danger. One that I'm told should be added to that list is Cowper on the Central Coast of New South Wales. It's a 12% National Party seat. Luke Hartsacker, the sitting member, is retiring. Rob Oakeshott, got close with a sort of half an effort last time. I think that seat is in grave danger.
To an independent?
To an independent or even Labor.
And just as an add-on...
Is Rob Oakeshott going to stand again?
I don't think so, no.
Right.
Just as an add-on, I think part of the Barnaby Joyce machinations, I wrote about this in the Oz, is the risk of an LNP split, either the demerging of the party up there in Queensland or just simply them looking to go into their own party room at some point. I'm not saying that any of this is about to happen. I think I can see Dennis shaking his head. He's from Queensland. I'm not. But I do think that those are risks down the track. I'm talking more in opposition, like when they get there and this frustrated Queensland LNP knowing that they can be more powerful on their own if the Nationals continue to have those disconnects between New South Wales, Victoria and Queensland.
Could I get that to that extent?
Well, it could. I mean, I was always a critic of the merger because I argued, and a lot of the old Nats argued as well, that it would open up the right flank to people like Hanson, Palmer, the Caddo boys, and it's done just that. But they say that the city Liberals are ignoring the bush and they want to get some sort of product differentiation between South East Queensland and the rest of Queensland. But as John Howard now says, he opposed the merger. He now says you can't unscramble the egg, and I think in the end that's going to hold true.
Let's hear from the National Party leader, Michael McCormack, on this.
Well, Barnaby Joyce has said that he's not canvassing out, and I believe him. Whether or not others are, well, that's a matter for them. But the fact is, I have the majority support in the National Party. And the fact is, I have to say, not one National Party member has come to me and said that they're dissatisfied with anything.
So do you expect a challenge to your leadership?
No, I don't.
Why are you so confident of that?
Well, because I know I've got the majority of the support of the party room.
Now, when there was a prospect of Peter Dutton becoming Prime Minister, and a couple of Nationals said they couldn't cope with that, they might even sit on the crossbench. Might the elevation of Barnaby Joyce have the same impact? I mean, they could be playing with fire here. I mean, they're 75 now. It might be fewer than that if they're not careful.
Chester, I don't think is going to put up with it, for one, and then there are others too, as you say. But just on Michael McCormick saying not one National has come to me to express concern, that's when you know something's going on. I mean, they've got problems. If he hasn't even had one National come to him, he's in bigger trouble than I thought.
Because there is concern, and one of the concerns is he's not standing up enough to the Liberals to create that differentiation you're talking about.
Now, Scott Morrison, I think, showed his frustration and annoyance with this issue. Not that they hadn't made some contribution themselves to upsetting the Wentworth by-election, but this was him on the Today Show on this issue.
I'm not in the Canberra Bible. I'm out of it.
Okay.
I'm focusing on all the things you said, as I did in that first press conference.
Barnaby Joyce will be a better running mate, won't he?
Now, look, that's bubble rubbish too, Carl. I mean...
Well, how is the leader of the National Party rubbish?
Mate, it's not happening. There's nothing going on. That's just more Canberra gossip.
All right, we'll see. Now, just before we leave the issue of Barnaby Joyce, I don't think Bob Katter's been paying attention. Have a look at this.
The Special Envoy for Drought, albeit different headlines about him today, but what's happening so far on the drought? You happy with the government's response?
Who's Special Envoy for Drought?
Barnaby Joyce.
All right. Well, I didn't know that.
OK. All right, well, I talked about all of those positive issues that the government could have focused on had they made an effort around that. But the Prime Minister, in the end, had to go on Twitter to get that message out.
G'day. You may have heard of the Canberra bubble. The Canberra bubble is what happens down here, where people get all caught up with all sorts of gossip and rubbish, and that's probably why most of you switch off any time you hear a politician talk. So what's important is we have to stay focused on the stuff that really matters and that is real.
Is that working?
Well, I don't think it works for him because he's the ultimate insider. I mean, his whole career background has been as an insider who understands the bubble of politics, whether it's Canberra or, you know, Macquarie Street when he was doing it in New South Wales.
But also the rubbish and the gossip and the nonsense, that's what happened 2 months ago.
Yeah. All right, just a couple of notes before we move on to talking pictures. Hugh Parkinson's Brexit video last week got high praise from another Hugh. There he is, Hugh Grant. He called it sublime. I think he was spot on.
Absolutely.
With that description. Now, it was a tough week for Scott Morrison, and he turned up at an outside doorstop in the electorate of Wentworth and found himself being heckled, and just momentarily he forgot where he was.
And I felt the same things at the time. And this is why I accept and understand that anger and that outrage, Mr. Speaker. Sorry.
I don't think Mr. Speaker made the trip from Melbourne to Wentworth for the campaign. All right, our panel, Frank Kelly, Peter Van Onselen and Dennis Atkins, will be back shortly with their final observations, but it's time now for Mike Bowers and Talking Pictures.
I'm Mike Bowers and I'm photographer at large for The Guardian Australia. I'm talking pictures this week with the host of Hard Quiz, the one and only Tom Gleeson. And a very warm welcome to this special edition of Talking Pictures Hard.
Oh, thank you. You know, comedians used to want to go on Johnny Carson. That has changed now. Everyone wants to get on Talking Pictures with Mike Bowers.
Labor Party.
Mate, did you see our Prime Minister invoked Forrest Gump talking about box of chocolates? If you vote for independence in the seat of Wentworth, you don't know what you're going to get because it's a box of chocolates. Now, I thought you've given so far, I bought you a box of chocolates, mate.
Oh, thank you. I'll choose the white chocolate.
Well, it's okay to be white.
Yeah, it sure is. Oh,
there's one chocolate of colour in there.
Yeah, it's the bare minimum is what it is.
Tom, all eyes were on Malcolm Turnbull's old seat as we asked the question, what is Wentworth?
Yeah, they're really going for it, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're throwing everything at it. They're moving embassies around.
David Rowe has drawn the Bondi iceberg.
And what's written on it? Religious freedom.
Religious freedom is floating there. Now, look, I'm not pointing the finger, but Philip Ruddock seems to be making a quick getaway here.
Now we have the freedom to ignore the report, I think.
I did love this John Kadelka. He's got the Bondi Lifesavers here going, it's Morrison again.
Yeah.
It's not waving, but...
I really like Scott Morrison. I'm enjoying him. He's like Australia's relief teacher. You know what I mean? He doesn't look quite right. You know he's not going to be around long. And while he's in, we can just all muck up.
The reach of Wentworth is wide. It goes to the Middle East. It goes to the Pacific. Well, what do you know? The closer the Wentworth by-election gets, the more human we become.
Obviously, you feel sorry for the people who are trapped on the island, but the people I really feel sorry for are the people who live on Nauru. Yeah. Imagine having all this rhetoric about your home. being the shittest place in the world.
Matt Golding's got the two-state solution with the Australian embassy at Tel Aviv, and Morrison's one-seat majority solution, picking it up and moving it. Yeah, he got a bit of strain on his face there, too.
You know what it is? It's probably just that the rent was due on the other place and they didn't like the Tel Aviv building and they just wanted to move house. But, we don't want to.
No.
It's just cheaper there and the building's nicer.
John Shakespeare, I do like the way he draws. He's got that sort of hi.
Yeah. The relief teacher look. It's like, I haven't studied this subject.
Now, this week saw supposedly an administrative error. Have the government voted for a motion in the Senate from Pauline Hanson's One Nation Party that says it's okay to be white.
And Richard Di Natale did say it very clearly to everyone sitting there that it had a white supremacist history.
Yeah.
It means they don't read what they're voting on and they don't listen to what anyone else is saying.
But it's okay because they reversed it. They had another vote and it was carried on the voices.
What was that one? It's okay to be shite.
Cathy Wilcox sees that there's a whole range of things that could be put into the Parliament shop. T-shirts, it's okay to be willfully ignorant. It's okay to deny your privilege. It's okay to be a dog whistler.
Yeah, it's got a lot going on there.
Yeah, it's okay to be some kinds of racist. I like that, Mark.
Yeah, it's a pretty good one, this one, but I have to admonish Cathy Wilcox just a little bit.
Yeah.
There's a lot of words in this cartoon.
That was talking pictures hard, Cathy.
That's right. My burn's going all directions. I'm hard to predict.
I did but see them passing by this week. The entire country's gone Harry and Meghan mad.
I know, it's crazy, isn't it? Because he's not even the most important prince.
He's the spare.
Yeah, he is. He's a relief teacher.
Don't forget to adjust your watches to local time. At the moment, it's Prime Minister number 30.
Yes. Well, you don't have to do that anymore because your phone does it quite often. It will just adjust to the local time
automatically.
Zone. Yeah, so maybe they should just give you a little image of who the Prime Minister is at that time.
Tom, it's been a great pleasure unpicking the events of this week, and I'll let you do the honours. And I'm gonna have my white.
Okay.
It's okay to be white.
I'm going to do it smoothly. Back to you, Barry.
Thanks, guys. Now, White Shot, the most observant of you will notice that Fran's not with us right at the moment. She will be back for her final observation, and you really should stick around for that. Your final observation, Dennis.
The Queensland Parliament decriminalised abortion this week, which was big news, but I thought even bigger news was that after the LNP members of the Parliament were given a conscience vote, when 3 of them voted with the government, the state president has threatened to disendorse them. Some kind of conscience, hey?
Yeah. Peter.
Back to Wentworth, this is not a prediction, but keep an eye on postal votes. David Sharma was down 52-48 at the start of the program. He's now down 51-49.
According to the AEC.
According to the AEC, and that's about 1,000 votes. Now, I don't think he'll quite get there, but boy, this could get super close. Hospitals haven't come in yet, and it's hard to know whether they'll vote for Dr. Karen Phelps or whether there'll be more conservative patients, for example, that might vote Dave Sharma. This might not be over, but I don't think he'll quite get there, but we'll see.
That's quite a dead cat to throw in the ring at the last minute, Peter.
It is.
All right, well, I promised you a final observation from Fran Kelly on the Wentworth by-election. Take it away, Fran.
It used to be a safe seat. How I wish it were again. But with Malcolm on the outside, Wentworth's not the same. We tried to win with Sharma, but Karen Phelps gained too much ground. Now we know the price of karma. If only Malcolm hung around. On the outside, the neg was gone. Religious freedom's locked away. But that doctor, she's a local, independent Jewish gay. On the east side, the polls declined. We could not afford to lose, but we ran right out of promises and embassies to move.
You're making us all feel very excited about being here.